to the May You Lead webinar. I'm Kelly King, and I'm your host for our webinars, and I'm the Women's Ministry Specialist at Lifeway Christian Resources. And we have a really important topic today. We're going to be talking about ministering to women in crisis. And this may sound like a really heavy subject, and it can be a very heavy subject, but I hope that you're going to leave today feeling encouraged as well. A couple of quick announcements, because I know that women are still just jumping on, and thank you so much for being here today and giving us your time. But I wanted to tell you just a couple of new things that are coming out from Lifeway. A new Bible study just released this week from Jen Wilkin. It's called God of Deliverance. If you've been following some of the studies we've done with Jen, we've done both two studies that really focus on the book of Genesis, and now this one is on chapters 1 through 18 of Exodus. And then also the last part of Exodus will actually come out in January of 2022. And so those are things that you might want to just keep on your radar as you plan the Bible studies for the women in your church. Also want to tell you just quickly about a new event that Lifeway is doing this year with Jackie Hill Perry, and it is called Glory. And so if you go to lifeway.com/glory, you can find out about that event. We'll be in several cities, and we would love for you to come, bring a group, and experience just a new type of event that with Jackie Hill Perry. We love her so much. So I think that you'll want to bring a group to that as well. Also, if you like what we're doing here and you can't get to a You Lead live event, because actually we are doing live events this year. We had our first one just about a month ago, and then also they'll start back in August. And so August and September, we are in a lot of different cities. So you want to check that out. But if you can't make it to a live event, you can always get our digital pass with about 3 hours of training called You Lead Virtual. And it's only $20. So it's like being at an event and you get the digital training. You can do it with your team. So it's a very inexpensive way to do some training. You can always show them our You Lead webinars. Maybe there's one that really has spoken to you and you want to share it with your team. All of our webinars have been on our Lifeway Women YouTube channel, as well as the Lifeway Women blog. So you can always find those there. I cannot believe it's been a year since we started doing these webinars. And if there's been one good thing that's come out of COVID, we've really enjoyed being able to bring these to you. And so I'm thankful for the opportunity that we get to do that. One of our panelists today too is Ashley Chestnut, and Ashley has a new not a Bible study, a new book coming out, and it's coming out this fall. And it's called Not Just You. And you can actually pre-order the book right now. And we've got a coupon for you if you do this. And Catherine's going to put the information in the chat section. And I know Ashley's going to have a chance to tell you maybe a little bit about what that is. But I think it's a great resource for a lot of leaders. And so I've gotten a chance to read through it. And let me just tell you, like, it tells things the way it is and what women are dealing with, especially young women in our churches. So be on the lookout for that. We have given out all of the CSB notebooks that we had on Psalms. So today I've got two of my particular books, The Ministry to Women, The Essential Guide for Leading Women in the Local Church. We're going to give away two of these today. And what we do is we usually just pick some numbers of those of you who attended, and I'll email you and let you know if you won that. Okay, that's a lot of commercials. And so I want us to make sure that we jump into our topic today. And I want to first introduce all of our panelists for you as well. Open the chat section up. Some of you are already doing that. And I think Michelle's probably encouraged you or Catherine just to put some of the who you are and where you're from. We love to see who you are. Also, there's a Q&A part on a webinar. And so if you have a question, we'll get to some questions toward the end of the webinar today. So feel free to put those in. If you use the raise hand feature, I will see that, but we don't necessarily have a way to connect to you to do that. So just feel free to, if you have a question, feel free to put that in the chat section or that Q&A section, and that will help us out tremendously as we get into the topic. All right, let's get some introductions. Ashley, let's start with you because I mentioned your book. So tell us who you are, where you serve, and then give us a glimpse of your book. We'd love to know more.
Yeah, so my name is Ashley Chestnut. I serve as the Associate Young Adult Minister at the Church at Brick Hills in Birmingham, Alabama. So, pretty much if you're out of college and in your 20s and 30s, you're my people. And so, my book, It's Not Just You, it comes out on August 3rd. And it is a book about women and sexual sin. And I have chapters on trauma and abuse and addiction. But it's just looking at how do we know sexual sin is sin? What are contributing reasons for our brokenness? And then if we are in the midst of sexual sin, what do we do? And especially for me, or if you're a ministry role leader, it's like, how do I walk alongside somebody? And if that's not been my struggle, how do I walk alongside somebody? So it's meant to equip both the struggler as well as the alongsider.
I'm really, really excited about it, Ashley. So we hope that people will definitely buy that. Denise, introduce yourself. You've been on our webinars before, but again, tell them who you are and where you're from.
Oh, wow, that's a tough act to
Oops, I think
follow
you're
with
muted.
Ashley.
There you go.
That's a tough act to follow with Ashley. I mean, I don't have a new butt coming out or anything like that. I'm Denise O'Donohue, and I am the Director of Counseling Development for our church, Imago Dei, here in Raleigh. And just really excited to be on this webinar today.
Yeah, thanks, Denise. And you've been in North Carolina how long?
My whole life.
Yeah. So people there know you, and we're so thankful for all the ministry that you've done there as well, too.
Thanks.
All right, Kay Herda. Kay is not new to the webinar either, but I wanted to make sure that you get a chance. Kay, tell them a little bit about you.
Hey, everybody. Thanks, Kelly. Yeah, so I've been married for 34 years to my husband, Chris. We've been in full-time ministry for 30 years. We have a couple of kiddos, both through adoption. Madison is from China, and she's 21, and Cami, her birth mother's Honduran. She's 19. I have been the live events counselor for Lifeway women's events for about 14 years. Wow. I think this is my 15th year, and I have loved every minute of it, and have done some lead training and have loved every minute of that with you all. We live on Florida's West Coast, and both my husband and I serve in a church here in Bradenton called Bayside Community Church. And it's a privilege to be with you all.
Well, I'm just going to say these are three of our, best trainers on this subject. And so this is a real treat to get to have all of you kind of in the same place. And as we talk about this subject, we kind of walked through some questions before we met today. And so one of the things we wanted to do is we want to do a quick poll, because we want to see maybe some of the major buckets of where you are, maybe what are the crisis situations that you see women encountering. So I'm going to launch our first poll, and feel free to I put other at the bottom. So maybe it's emotional health, like maybe it's depression, anxiety, some things like that. Maybe it is sin struggle. Maybe it's addictions, a relationship crisis, like whether it's a prodigal child or maybe a marriage in crisis. It could be grief is the crisis situation, or maybe we didn't really hit that bucket very well. So feel free to do that. But this will give us some indications of what you all are dealing with every single day. Yeah, there's definitely one that's kind of leading the pack a lot, which isn't a huge surprise, especially considering the past year. Okay, I am going to close it out in about 3 seconds. So if you haven't had a chance to and you want to jump in there, feel free to do that. Okay, ready, set. I'm ending the poll, and I'm going to share the results. As you can tell, emotional health, 75% of you said that this is the primary crisis situation that you are currently encountering. And so I would say even with the last year, this is no surprise to us when we think about anxiety, when we think about depression, when we think about just how we're dealing with our emotional health. So that's huge. And then relationship crisis, I think that's also just, and part of that goes hand in hand. And then also third, grief. I think that grief is a huge thing, especially in the past year as well. So this is really interesting. Thank you so much for helping us kind of know where we're going to go with this. I'm going to close the poll for right now, and we're gonna just kind of dive into some questions, and I'm going to try to spotlight you as we do this. But let's start with the leader, because we use the phrase that leaders need to lead themselves first. And this goes in the area of crisis management as well. So I want us to, Kay, I want you to address the leader for a second and talk about how do we assess our own personal struggles?
That's a great question, Kelly. And I'm not at all surprised by the results of that poll. Depression, anxiety, loss of so many kinds, or just it. Counselors are seeing it. I'm sure Denise, you are seeing it a lot. Ashley, all of us are seeing it. We're in a mental health pandemic, and I always like to say leaders go first. Leaders go first. So assessing you just like in the airplane when you put the oxygen mask on yourself before you help somebody else, we have to put the oxygen mask on ourselves and assess where we are. What is the crisis within? How are we doing? And I would encourage you just to take a few hours on a Saturday and sit down with your journal and just ask yourself questions in the area first physically. How am I doing physically? How am I feeling? Where am I carrying? Where in my body am I carrying stress and anxiety? How am I? How am I living that out? Uh, and be honest with yourself. I like to say, if you can't define it, you can't defeat it, or if you can't name it, you can't reframe it. So we have to be able to name it for ourselves, and then look at yourself emotionally. What am I experiencing? What am I feeling? What am I grieving from this past year? And not just loss of life, but loss of dreams and hopes. And again, naming it is so important. And then asking yourself spiritually, how am I doing? What's my time like with the Lord? How am I caring for my own soul? All of those areas, and then taking an honest assessment and saying, how can I get help now? What's the next step for me? How do I put the mask on myself before I try to offer the mask to somebody else? Because it'll leak out. It'll be, somebody will say something, it'll be a trigger, and your stuff will leak. Um, and so, just as leaders, I just implore you, let's go first for our own health.
I think that's really good. As far as those are just some real practical things. And even for me, over the last 3 months, I've been doing kind of a journal, and it's been part of some things that I've been doing for some classwork. And one of the things I have to address every day is, how am I feeling? Like, what are my feelings? And I would tell you that I have never considered myself really an anxious person, but I had to look over the past 3 months to kind of do kind of an evaluation. And I was surprised at the fact, when I looked at my feelings, how many of those days there was a little bit of anxiety or frustration that came out of, maybe those are things that manifest themselves. So those were surprising to me. So I think that's a good way to assess yourself too, is even just keeping a journal and like you said, to name it and be able to
Absolutely.
say that. Yeah.
Absolutely. I went to see, just not feeling great. And I went to see a functional medicine doctor who did a blood panel recently, did a blood panel. And she said, "Oh, did you realize, according to your numbers, whatever, it's all technical, you're carrying chronic stress." And I'm like, I don't feel stressed out. But now that, she has said that, I'm really taking an assessment. Okay, I feel stress right now. I'm feeling a little stressed right now, actually. um, so yeah, just to be able to know that and to name it, and then to have a game plan to address it is so helpful. I love that. I love the journal that you've been doing. It's hard for us to name our emotions, isn't it? How do
Oh
you feel?
yeah.
Like, good? I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. And putting them in those kind of buckets, like that's
Yeah.
been eye-opening for me.
Yes.
A little more than what I realized. So that's good.
Yep.
Ashley, I'm going to bring you on here, and So if we have to, as leaders, think about how we assess ourselves, sometimes we have to, as a leader, how do we prepare ourselves? Because when someone comes to us in crisis, there's things that we probably need to be thinking of ahead of time, not just when it happens. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, and I don't know about y'all, but if a girl or a woman in our church comes up to me, I have no idea what's about to come out of her mouth. Like it could range from homosexuality to sin struggle to a disclosure of abuse. And so in those moments, I really do claim James 1:5 when it says, if you ask God for wisdom, like, and so even just prayer, but even pausing myself and breathing deeply, breathing in through my nose, out through my mouth, and even just helping myself, because Kay's right, like we carry tension, and I'll recognize somebody approaches me and I can tell it's going to be intense. I start tensing. So even just helping myself be relaxed, and sometimes I even pause and do breathing exercises with the woman in front of me just because she's tense with whatever she's about to share. Something that I do that helps me is I pretty much always have some sort of notebook with me because it helps me to take notes. It helps me to pay attention to what she's sharing. It helps me with follow up, or if I need to pass things along or help with finding some sort of resource, I can note it right then and there. And then sometimes it's not obvious to me why this woman is sharing something with me. So I'm not afraid to ask, thank you so much for feeling confident in sharing. But I'm not sure what would be helpful to you in this moment. Do you want me to offer counsel? Are you wanting me to help you with a resource? Are you just wanting me to listen and pray with you? And so even offering that can help the person tell you what would be helpful, because I don't want to jump into a fix it mode or assume that I know what they're looking for, just even with what they're sharing with me. So I don't know if Kay or Denise, if you have anything to add to that.
No, I think that's great, Ashley. And I love the idea about keeping the notebook with you, because as I get older, I'm finding I'm more and more forgetful. So that's a great idea.
I also think just kind of that body language, because there have been situations, and I still remember being on church staff and not and women, and like you said, you never know when they're going to come up to you with something. And I'm sure that I thought that I had heard it all, but I probably have not heard it all. And so trying to just make sure that my face was not conveying what might have been in my brain of like, oh wow, like we're going, like this is hard. Yes. Yeah, so those are good. All right, Denise, let's ask you a question here too, because when they do come to you, when that person comes to you, there's usually a little bit of like a triage, like
Yeah.
some initial questions. I love that Ashley mentioned the notebook too, because I'm like you,
Yeah.
like that's really good, even just to kind of take notes of like this is the person and this was the situation and this was the day. But there, you've got some good questions, Denise, of how do we do that and how do we triage someone?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, we want the person that we're talking with to know that she's being heard. That's extremely important, especially when you're dealing with someone who is experiencing a crisis situation. So the questions that you want to ask really are to help guide her to tell her story. So I'm particularly fond of the questions used by the Trauma Healing Institute, because they're just so simple, and that is exactly what they're designed to do, is draw out the story. So there's just 3 of them. The first one is, what happened? The second one is, how did you feel? And the third one is, what is the hardest part? So by asking her those and then listening very intently, you give her space to tell her story.
Yeah, that's really those are 3 very important questions, and those are questions you could even just kind of write down as well too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's good. Just to kind of basic get to those. And what was the resource that you mentioned again? Treat.
Sorry, it's Trauma Healing Institute. It's
Oh,
part of
okay.
the American Bible Society.
Okay, awesome. Well, I do want to talk about resources for a second. And Kay, I want to bring you into this one as well, because we know that it's really important for, someone who's leading a ministry to women to think about, having some resources, because I'm not equipped to do counseling, but I can point them to people. So let's talk about how you build that kind of network.
Yeah, this is it. It's super, super important to have referrals for Christian counselors, physicians, psychiatrists, domestic violence shelters, um, uh, DCFS, even police officers, first responders, drug and rehab centers. You know, all of the things that you know that your women are going through, and you can do that just as a person, you know, from your own home. You can make calls, you can build your own little referral list of those things. If your church doesn't have anything like that, or you're charged with doing it for your church and you don't know where to go, call a church in your area, a large church in your area that probably already has that, or maybe even has counselors on staff. Most churches are so willing to help and so willing to give whatever they have. It doesn't even have to be necessarily, well, I guess you would want it to be a church in your area, but there are a lot of national resources, national numbers that you can have at your fingertips. I think that's included in some of our resources. We have some of those. Yep, she just put that up. So that's fantastic. Also, trying to help people find a counselor. They don't even have to be a counselor in your own area these days, because telehealth counseling is so mainstream now that I could be seeing a counselor in Colorado and living in Florida, and that's fantastic. And um, so there are some resources, some ways that you can find a counselor. It's not listed on this, so I'm going to say it. One of my favorites, my new favorites, is psychologytoday.com. And you're thinking, why, how would you find a Christian counselor? They're so thorough in, like, you can select, you can filter by insurance, by issue, by faith. So if you want a Christian counselor, you click that first. It shows you the picture of the person, what they specialize in. They give a write up about their own philosophy of counseling. It Finding a counselor is like, it's just hard work. It's like finding a doctor that you feel really comfortable with. Sometimes you might think you found one and you call the office and maybe the receptionist wasn't super kind. I think I'll move on to the next one. It's really a hit and miss. And you might try one or two before you land on the one that you really connect with. So don't give up if that's you, or the person that you're helping. Don't give up. But I do like that psychologytoday.com, because you can read a lot about the counselor themselves. And yeah, that answer the question.
Yeah, and I wasn't aware of that either. But I do know, especially a lot of the women who are probably watching this or will watch this are maybe from a smaller town, or maybe they're, maybe a smaller church, and they don't feel like they have, the resources. And so I think it's good for us just to be able to say, especially like you said, like you can do, just like we do telemed now, we can also do the counseling online.
Mhm.
So that's a big help for women who are in communities where maybe you don't feel like you have a good base of resources. So that's really good. Ashley, I'm going to ask you too, because you mentioned this when we were talking before we did, when we were planning this. Your church does some real, and Kay, I think you do this as well too, but you all have done a good job of like how you connect with counselors and how you stay in touch with them and building those relationships. And you have some reasons for that. So I thought it might be good, Ashley, for you to tell us a little bit about how you do that.
Definitely. So we do have one counselor on our church staff, but it's a male counselor, and I've found that many women want to see a female, understandably. And I've also found that he doesn't specialize in everything. So if it's an eating disorder, if it's trauma, it is better to connect them. So me and a couple of people from our church staff, usually once or twice a year, we go to a different counseling office and just sit down. We usually take cookies like at Christmas or things like that, but we just try to get an appointment where we can meet and chat with the counselors. I've often emailed and just said, hey, I heard about you, and I would like to know, what do you believe about some sexual issues? Like, how do you counsel somebody? If somebody tells you you're a Christian, do you call things sin? So there's things like that that I ask, just as I'm trying to get to know counselors so that I can make a good referral. I want to know who does eating disorders, who does EMDR therapy for trauma, who has like parenting issues in their wheelhouse, who's the point person for grief. So that's been helpful. And then even with our church, we do some assistance for our members with counseling if we make referrals. And so even with that, we ask the counselor to do a communication waiver that the client signs so that we can speak to the counselor, not so we can be all up in their details and business. It's more accountability since we're stewarding our resources in this way, but it's also opened the door. I've had 2 situations where it was life and death and suicide, and the counselor and I were able to communicate and get a person to the emergency room, or me swing by their house and check on them, which the counselor can't do, but I can as one of the ministers at our church. And so that's been a helpful tool where I can communicate with their counselor if they write my name on that waiver.
I think that is so helpful because you do have a good sense of there's a relationship there. It's not just a list. And I think sometimes what I have looked at is I've thought, okay, here's my resource list, and this is what I'm going to give the person that I'm meeting, that needs this. But for you to take that extra step and to be able to say, I do want to, like, I want to have that conversation with you. And I don't know, Ashley, do you have like a list of questions that you ask?
At this point, I don't necessarily anymore. It's more if I'm looking for a counselor in an area, I'll think of some questions that relate to that topic. But I do want to know, sexuality is such a big part of what I deal with. I do want to know, what does the counselor believe about certain sexual sins, and how do they counsel someone that's struggling with that?
Absolutely, because there's going to be different people who may not really have a biblical worldview, and so you want to make sure that you're kind of guiding people in the right direction for sure. And Denise, I want to bring you in here too and talk about just even kind of the liability. Like Ashley kind of talked a little bit about this, but we do have to be careful, don't we?
Yeah.
In the church, I think we want to offer counseling or we want to be able to do this, but we need to be careful how we label ourselves or what we promise to people, right?
Absolutely. And so, I mean, in North Carolina, a big distinction is between people who are licensed and people who are not licensed. And so you want to make sure that people know that. I counsel under the umbrella of our church. And so people recognize that what I do is an extension of what the elders do. I'm acting on their behalf. But, you really need to realize that laws vary by state. And so you need to know what your state sees in regards to this. So I would certainly encourage any woman listening to talk to the pastor in her church regarding specific laws in her area. Certain issues are going to be mandated by law to report. I think pretty much across the board is suspected child abuse or neglect is required to be reported. And so if you fail to report that a suspected child abuse or neglect, then not only are you as non-reporter liable, but also if you're part of a church staff, then you can also bring that liability on your church. So you need to work very closely and carefully in that kind of thing. And then there's other matters that I just simply call matters of wisdom as far as reporting. And that would be something like Ashley just mentioned. If you're talking with a woman who you feel like may be a harm to herself or a harm to someone else, that's not something you want to keep to yourself. You at least need to bring an elder pastor in on that and collaborate with them about what the best course of action is. Anything like that, it's best not to withhold that information and keep that private or confidential.
Would you add in there, you mentioned child abuse, domestic violence. How would you, what is our responsibility there as well?
That again, is probably going to vary state to state as far as legal issues. But for us, we definitely see that as a matter of church discipline. And so we want to get the first and foremost is safety, getting the person safe, and then dealing with the abuser through church discipline if they're a member of the church. But safety of the woman that's being abused would be of primary importance.
That's awesome. I'm going to bring all of the panelists on here for just a second, because the next question, I really want all of you to just talk about this, because you do it in different ways. But I want to talk about the importance of listening and the importance of the ministry of presence. And so, Kay, I hear you speak to this a lot. I mean, all three of you
Sorry.
do, but let's talk and give everybody a chance to kind of add their own particular take on this. But let's just discuss why women, as more than we give them advice, more than we send them to somebody else, why is it important for us to learn how to be better listeners and how to just be present?
Yes, and I see us all nodding our heads. And we have just become a culture uh, that doesn't know how to listen anymore. Where if somebody's talking to us, we're thinking about the next thing we want to say. We want to fix. We want to solve, and it comes from a good place. We want to help. Um, but I like to say this in ministry of presence: show up and shut up. Like sometimes, like if someone wants you to listen, they want you to listen, listen, and that's ears open, and letting them, inviting them to tell their story, and doing it in a way that's, you're not distracted. If I'm sitting down with someone and I have my phone next to me, and we're so connected to those things, I'll either turn it over or put it in my purse, or I'll say, maybe it's a situation, hey, I have teenage daughters and they're on the highway right now. I'm going to leave this up and I'm just going to glance down. I let her know that ahead of time, that's what's going to be happening. But turn off technology, be present. I would say, don't think about a relatable anecdote. When someone's sharing something with you, the next thing you want to say isn't, oh, that happened to me, or, oh, I know just how you feel, or no, it's not your story time, it's their story time. And I just think ministry of presence, being present in the middle of a crisis. People, they're in a shock fog, they're in a grief fog, their brain isn't working correctly. They're not going to remember the things that you say in that moment, unless you say something harmful. But they're going to remember that you were there. And so listening well, leading well, loving well, and listening well are our mantras for our ministry. And so it's just so, so important. I'd love to hear what y'all have to say about that.
I would echo everything you just said, Kay. And it's helpful for me to just think about, how would I want somebody to respond to me in this moment? I don't want them to jump into a fix it mode. Usually, if I'm sharing, I just want you to listen and mirror back to me. And so being a mirror is a helpful way to think about it, reflecting back. I heard you say this. Is that what you meant? And again, like what I said earlier, if you're not sure what they're looking for, ask. What would be helpful to you right now? I'm happy to continue listening. Is there anything in particular you would like me to ask, or anything in particular you'd like to share? So even just offering them that freedom of telling you what would be helpful in the moment. But yeah, Denise, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think y'all pretty much covered the bases. I'll just say one bonus out of being a really good listener and allowing them to just tell their story is sometimes they conclude what needs to happen next on their own as they tell the story. And that's always helpful. If you just, a lot of people are verbal processors. And so having someone that will sit there and truly listen as they process out loud can be extremely beneficial.
Yeah.
One thing I would even, sorry, Kelly, one thing even with what Denise just said, something especially during the pandemic I've tried to be better about is when somebody shares something, if there is some sort of date attached to it, I go ahead and mark that on my calendar, whether it's like next year's anniversary of a loss, or a rape anniversary, or a sobriety anniversary. I go ahead and mark those things on my calendar so that next year or next month or whatever, I can write a note, or I can just send them a text and say, hey, I remember you sharing this as an anniversary. I just wanted you to know I'm praying for you today, and even just share what I'm praying. So I'm trying to be better even about following up on the things that I'm hearing. And it may not be what they've asked for, but it again, it's another way of showing that we care.
I do the same thing. I do the same thing. And sometimes if it's just so traumatic, it will be, there are no words. There just are no words. And so um I've taken, like I've said, okay, I'm going to send you a text every day. I'm going to send you a scripture every day for 30 days. Don't respond to me. Don't answer the text. Don't say anything. You don't have to say anything about it. But I know that the trauma or the situation she's in, she can't even focus on the word of God. She can't look at the word. She's not going to read. She's not going to study anything. But I want her to have that healing word of God before her. And so I ask the Spirit, what would minister to me in these moments? And it's just send a word. I don't comment on it. I don't unpack it. It's just letting the word of God speak. And that I'll hear back later from one woman who had lost her husband and said, I don't even know what I would have done without that. I wrote every day. I wrote those on a note card, and I put them I got a little box, and I put them in a box, and I called it my hope box. And then when I needed to, I would just pull from it and look. It's all she could do. It was just all she could do in the moment. So there are sweet and tender ways that you can minister to people, even when they can't hear it.
And those are things that any of us can do. Like,
Yes.
we don't have to have all the tools of being a counselor to be present, to listen,
Right.
to remember when there's a loss in their life, things like that. That's gold, you guys. Like, that's worth the whole webinar there to me, is being able to recognize that we don't have to know everything. But I do know, Kay, sometimes and this is something that's probably a little more, someone who's done this a while, you can pick up on, are the nonverbal cues that people get, that women might give. So how do you kind of read someone, and how do you pay attention to maybe some of the needs that we don't necessarily just know up front?
Yeah, listening involves looking, right? And so that's part of it. If I'm not looking at the person who's speaking, I'm not going to be able to see, gosh, is she stressed? Are her arms closed? Is her body turned away from me? I want to look at her body language. I want to see the nonverbals. Maybe she's telling a story and it's really, really traumatic, and she tells it like she's reading the newspaper, with no emotion at all. Or maybe she'll be talking along and she'll say something, and I'll notice that tears well up in her eyes, and then she'll keep going on to something else. I always go back to those things. I'll always say, hey, I noticed you told me this really, really hard thing. And almost like you were, I don't know, reading a chapter in a book. Tell me what you're feeling around it. Or, hey, I noticed when you mentioned your mom, uh, you welled up. Can we go back to that for a minute? Because tears tell a story, and tears are a language. And so tell me about the tears. And that's usually all it takes. It's not a lot of prodding. It's all it takes for the waterworks to start. But there are so many nonverbals. The body language is turned away, or just all of those things for us to pay attention and not just let go by. Right? It's taking the time to notice them first of all, but then to go back and to ask about them. Not in an accusatory way. Not like, hey, you told that without crying, but in the most gentle and tenderest, like, I'm really curious. I would be crushed by that. That kind of, tell me what you're feeling. Yeah.
I've even seen, like, you and I have been prayer partners this past year. And so I've even seen you do that for me. Sometimes you'll just be like, hey, let's go back to that. There was something a little more, and it's hard sometimes for us to talk about those things or to focus on ourselves, but it is helpful, isn't it, for us
Yeah,
to get there.
that's the gold mine right there. That's the treasure.
Mhm.
We come in kind of almost armored up, right, to tell our story with self-protect and tell things that are hard. And this is how I'm going to say it. I don't want to fall apart. And I'm afraid if I say it, I'll lose it and I won't ever be able to get it back. And if I start crying, I'll never stop. And all the fears that we have about our own emotions. but it's the unpacking those things where we find really where we're going to find healing, right? Because if we can't, again, if we can't name it,
Mm,
we can't reframe it. So
that's so good.
Kelly,
Yeah.
even jumping off of that, I had a young woman this week who is struggling with dealing with some trauma in her past, but also has a lot of anxiety and had a panic attack recently. And so even when one of the things she asked me this week is like somebody was with her and didn't respond well when she was in the midst of having a panic attack. And so she was like, what can I do next time? Like how, if I'm feeling like I'm starting to amp up, like what can I do? And if somebody is with me, what do I need to tell them to do? Because he was trying to like comfort me and touch me, and I did not want to be touched. And so, because that's a scary thing for the person. And then if you're present with a person when they're dissociating or when they're having a panic attack. So two things that might just be helpful for you. One is, again, breathing deeply. So speaking calmly to somebody if you're with them. Don't touch them, just speak calmly and let your voice be an anchor, but encouraging them to breathe in through their nose and out through their mouth. But then also you can do a grounding technique with the five senses. And so 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. If you can't remember that, just remember the five senses. But as you're talking to them, trying to get them to focus, what are 5 things that you see? Can you name them? What are 4 things that you can touch? Tell me what you can touch. What are 3 things that you hear? I hear the lawnmower outside. I hear the footsteps in the hallway. What are 2 things that you smell? What's something that you taste? Or if you can't do that, just 5 senses. Tell me something that you can smell or that you taste or that you can touch. But those are things that can help ground a person, and it's giving them something else to focus on as they're feeling amped up. You're kind of helping to de-escalate, and especially if your voice is calm, it can be soothing and helpful in that moment as well.
and
I
that would
think that's,
just add to that, even just in the moment, just having them uh, go ahead and put your feet flat on the ground. I want you to feel the ground, feel it's not moving, it's not going anywhere. And then if you're sitting at a table, like if it's happening in Starbucks or whatever, hold on, hold on to the table, feel the table. It grounds them physically and gives their anxiety a place to land and rest. My daughter has an anxiety disorder, and she does this regularly. Like, okay, girlfriend, put your feet on the ground, breathe. If you're staying calm, not what do I do? What do I do? What do I do? But um, but again, yeah, the sound of your voice being the guide and giving them something to ground to.
wow. And I do think all 3 of you, you really do help me. Like you do know how to like speak those things calmly, and kind of that is such great advice. Like I'm going to use that. Like I'm going to use that grounding. That's very that sounds so simple, but I can see how that would really make a difference too. And Kay, I know you mentioned like texting some people scripture,
Mhm.
and we always want to point people to God's word. But Denise, I want to talk about sometimes we tend to, as Christian women, we tend to over spiritualize a few things, or we tend to, um, we want to give them biblical answers, but sometimes it's not exactly what the answer needs to be at that moment. So Denise, speak to us just a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. We want to be careful to avoid the take 2 Bible verses and call me in the morning kind of approach, because that's not going to be very helpful. And I think, just this morning, I read a very good blog post on Gospel Coalition, and he was pointing out in there, it was on suffering, but one of the things he said in there, it highlights to the fact of, yes, we absolutely want to point them to scripture. The timing is essential. And I loved the example Dr. Ortland used in this. He said, it is very true for Joseph that the things that happened to him were evil, but God meant them for good, right? That's what he tells his brothers. But if you roll back the clock, 20 years, 30 years, however many years, when he was in that pit, I don't think it would have been very helpful. He would not have wanted to hear, your brothers are evil, but God means this for good. And same thing when he was being chased around by Potiphar's wife, and the same thing when he was in prison. There's a time and a place for that. And I think as God worked in his life, he began to mature and see more clearly how God had been present and been at work in that. So the timing is very critical, but in a crisis, again, I feel like we're beating a broken drum, but it's so important that we listen to her pain. We want her to know that she's not alone, and we want to instill hope. And I think this last piece right here is where in the initial phases, scripture can be so important, because I'll often just say simple things, very simple things like God is present, God cares for the brokenhearted, God loves you. And that may actually not be something I just simply speak to her or speak over her, but I might in a prayer over her, just can I pray for you right now at some point in the conversation where it's the right time to insert that is just let me pray for you right now, and just remind her of those key truths about God that are true in her presence. And so you're not beating her over the head with a Bible verse, but it's almost like you're allowing your faith to carry her and be the heart and hands of Jesus at a moment where she's not even able to think clearly.
Yeah, I think that's really wise. And we haven't really touched on prayer yet, but I want us to get to that. And I know we've got like 15 minutes left. I knew this was going to happen. I do want us to shift the focus just a little bit, and I want us to think for a moment of how we take care of ourselves as leaders and how we take care of our own souls. So one of the things, we have another poll that we'd like to ask you guys, another question. So I'm going to launch it, and it's really on personal self-care. And so we want to ask you, and I'm just launched it. How are you currently caring for your own soul? Is it just, like you do that through and honestly, there's probably a lot of different ones. You could probably say 3 or 4 of these, but maybe one stands out more than the other. Your personal Bible study and quiet time. Maybe you are seeing a counselor, and that is really like helping you deal with this. Maybe the exercise and nutrition part of caring for your soul is a primary focus for you right now. Maybe it's just you need to focus on rest. Like you need to learn, I've got to learn how to rest. Or maybe you're just saying, I'm not doing a good job of caring for my soul. I think we can be honest. We don't know how you answer this question, so we can't trace it back. But if you can be honest with us, I think that really does help a little bit. I'm going to give you just 7 more seconds, 6. And a lot of you have answered. Okay, I'm going to end the poll, and I'm going to share the results. So a lot of you do care for your soul through your Bible study, through your quiet time, which we love hearing that. I think that is when we go to God's word and we let him speak to us. And I think that that's so important. I do think it's I thought it was interesting that 40% of you said exercise and nutrition, that really helps you take care of your soul. And then thank you for being honest that 30% of you just said, I'm struggling in this area. I think that's really good that you guys were honest in that particular area. But there is a wide variance here of just, several things are included here. So let's talk about this. And I'm going to pull everybody back in here a second. I want to ask you, Ashley and Denise and Kay, how do you take care of your own soul? Okay, so how do you do this well?
I'll go first, and just disclosure, I'm single, so I don't have the responsibilities of a spouse or children. But sometimes people think you can do more, or that you're always available because you're single, because you don't have those responsibilities. And so I have Fridays and Saturdays are my off days, and so I guard those. I do not meet with people on those days, or if they text me, or I don't really check email, but if they text me, I'm like, I'll get back to you when I'm back in the office. So there's things like that, putting my phone on do not disturb, and just making sure I am diligent about my own time in the word. Exercise is great. I try to exercise regularly, have a routine is helpful. And then I've seen a counselor this past year.
That's good. Denise, what about
Yeah,
you?
I'm not in the exercise category. Sorry. I'm sure I would be a better person if I were, but that's not my thing. But I do find that obviously all of those things, my time with the Lord, prayer, reading good, solid books that can help me process through some things. And then also, I have a dear friend that I attended school with that is in member care for the International Mission Board. So she lives overseas. And we're able to each process with the other kind of what's going on so that it doesn't weigh so heavy by being able to talk about it. And of course, obviously, names are kept completely out of the picture. And since she's on the other side of the world, chances are almost infinitesimal that we would know who the other one was talking about anyway. But that's been very, very helpful for me because I'm a verbal processor, and just being able to kind of download some of that has really helped.
Kay, what do you do personally?
Yeah, it's all the same for me. I don't think so much about Bible study for my soul care as I do just meditation, letting the word read me,
Mm.
and just being still and listening to the voice of the Father, to giving myself that kind of space. I love to be outside. And so nature really, really is healing and restorative to my soul, whether that's a walk on the beach or kayaking, or I love to bike. And so biking, and I try really hard. Not just to have a day off of work, but a Sabbath where the phone stays in the bedroom. I don't even look. I don't even look at it. I don't run errands. Uh, I don't do I don't shop. I don't, all those things. I'll like get everything done on that day off. It's not a day off. It's a day of rest and play, and to give myself permission to nap, or just sit and stare, or I mean whatever. And I think what you don't do is probably as important as what you do. Like I wouldn't, I don't know that like drinking in excess is helpful. Binging Netflix or anything else probably isn't super helpful. It might be a way, it might seem restful to you, but you're escaping what you're feeling in those moments. I know this because I do it. So I know what I speak. Um, but those aren't really caring for my soul. They're numbing it. So just look at the things that you're doing and ask yourself, hey, am I really caring for the part of me that's really important but unseen? Because that's what your soul is, your mind and your personality and your will. And am I caring for that, or have I just found a clever and unique way to numb it and escape from it?
Oh man, that's convicting. And what you said, and somebody put it in the chat too, is that I do think sometimes we think of a day off, not a day of rest. Like there is a difference. That's a great distinction there too. Okay, we've got a few minutes left, and I have one more question that I want to ask you at the end. But Michelle, I'm going to have you hop on, and you've got some questions that have come in.
Yes, we've got a number of questions. Okay, one big question that came through is there a resource where all of this is written down? And is there a good training to go through if you are going to work with abuse victims, and that you all would recommend? I immediately thought of Mary DeMuth's Into the Light Bible study that Lifeway worked with her on, that's designed to help churches in ministering, just teaching people how to minister to those who have been in abuse situations. And the simple things that even that you were talking about, I think in the discussion about when someone's been abused physically or sexually, or in any way. Sometimes being too close or touching them is a big trigger. So, but do you all have other recommended resources for specifically for abuse victims or um,
So Denise and I are both facilitators with the Trauma Healing Institute. And so they offer an initial training and then an advanced training. And so you can go to Trauma Healing Institute's website to find out when those are. But those have been helpful. You learn how to facilitate a curriculum that deals with any number of trauma issues, but it helps you to be a good listener. It helps you with tools that you can do with people. So I would say that's a good one. And then the book Untangling Emotions by Alistair Groves and Winston Smith, I think are the authors, but that's a good first step as far as how do I untangle them for myself, and then if I'm walking with someone. I've done it as a book group with women at our church as well.
good.
Yeah, I would agree with what Ashley just said too. And just kind of to answer generally answer that question, Michelle, ccef.org, I put that in the chat, has regular blogs. I think they're weekly, but you can also go to their website and you can search by topic and you can find articles on particular issues that you're interested in. So I would say that's another great resource. You can also subscribe to their journal, which is just, I just recently redid my subscription. I think it's $21 a year for a digital subscription. And again, you can search on any number of topics in that. So I think those are really helpful.
Good.
Yeah, if you want kind of an armchair resource, Adam Young Counseling. He's a counselor. He's been trained by Dan Allender. Does a lot of story and trauma work. He has a podcast, The Place We Find Ourselves. It's called The Place We Find Ourselves, and just a lot on abuse, a lot on trauma, and it has been super, super helpful to me.
Good.
And bradhambrick.com. Brad Hambrick is a counselor at Summit Church, and he's a professor at Southeastern. But he has videos. He has like 9-part videos for a number of issues. And he also has it that you can email his counseling office and they will email you a digital copy of the workbook. So there's been several of those that I've done with women, including his one on PTSD.
Good. I think these are all such great suggestions. And I think the idea of building a network is really key, that you get these lists of resources and you continue to build on that, because a lot of the questions that have come through are related to resource needs. People that are a lot of major marital issues and infidelity in marriages, and they're wanting to have good resources for that. And so it's really building that. And so I think from the list that we have, and then we may need to continue to add to that, or each woman needs to add to that. Another big question that came through.
Yeah, Michelle, can I insert real fast?
Yes,
I know we only have 3 minutes.
I know, yeah.
But maybe what we need to do too is we could let's talk to our blog team about having a blog on the Lifeway Women blog about some resources. And we know resources change a lot and websites, but that might be something. Okay,
that's a great idea. Another question
that
was, a lot of women that she's helping are willing to go to a counselor, but they can't afford it. Is there any suggestions for how churches can help in that area specifically? I know, Ashley, you mentioned your church helps in different aspects.
So the first Sunday of the month, we take up a family assistance offering, and that's actually what we use. So whatever the people in our church give in that once a month offering, we use it to pay for counseling. And so we project, and we do 4-session increments that we can pay part or all. And so we ask the person what they can pay. And then we also know who in our area does sliding scale with counseling payments. So there's even some counseling offices we work with, just because we send a lot of people their way.
We do the same thing, but not on a monthly basis. We just have an option for giving where a person can designate their funds to go to counseling.
One question I'm going to jump on here because I want to make sure we answer it, is how do you identify manipulative, or maybe someone who is just has some needs, which I'm thinking if she's doing that much to get attention, there are some deeper needs there and deeper issues. Um, but sometimes people like that, other people will say, "Oh, it's not a big deal. She's just like that." How do you know where to help with someone like that in that situation?
That's hard. I feel like if you're asking the question, there's a problem.
Hmm.
If you're wondering, um, yeah, wow, that's really, if if here's what I'll say: you can't work harder at getting healthier than the other person is willing to do. You
Hmm.
can't work harder at it than they are.
Hmm.
So if that person, if you've had a conversation, honest conversation with, this is what I see, this is just what I observe. I'm not making a judgment about you. I'm not saying you're this. I'm not labeling you. This is just what I observe. And would you consider talking to somebody or getting help? If they're not, they're not,
Hmm.
and you have to let that go.
Hmm.
Um, you can't work harder at it than they are.
Good. Good.
Yeah, that's good. All right, our hour is up. And I know I really wanted to get to the subject of just prayer, and I'm gonna end it with this. So let's make it as short as we can. But let's talk about the importance of praying when you meet with someone, and what is a good way to, like, why is this so important, and how do you incorporate it when you meet with someone? Okay, I'll start with you, then we'll go to Denise and then Ashley, and we'll wrap it up.
Yep, I'll be super fast. It's pray. It's important. However, if you're talking to somebody who's had some spiritual abuse, and you've got the sense this is their situation, ask them first. Ask them first. Is it okay if I pray with you?
Yeah, that's good. And I would say too, what I find myself doing is praying before I meet with somebody. I am often praying very silently while I'm listening at the same time for wisdom for what to say next. And then, with permission, I also want to pray over her, inviting the Lord to be present and giving us His will and His wisdom in the situation. I want her to know it's not coming from me. I am seeking the Lord into this situation to speak truth.
And I would echo what these ladies have said. And something else I'll do depending on the situation is teach them how to pray with the lament psalms. So following the structure and replacing the psalmist's question with their question, the psalmist's description of circumstances with
So
their
good.
description of circumstances. So sometimes it's even teaching them how to pray
Mhm.
with what they're walking through when talking to God is hard.
Mm. Wow, we've covered a lot of ground. I know there's a lot of ground we, haven't gotten to, but it's been a full hour. And so thank you all so much for joining us today. And thank you for your wisdom. Thank you for what you do. I'm just in awe because I know it's something that I don't feel really as equipped to do. And so I think it's always great when I feel like I get to be a learner in these situations as well. And thank you, ladies, for joining us today. And again, we'll be posting this to the Lifeway Women YouTube channel. So if you want to go back and hear some of the things that they said, I think that'll be really, really worth your time. So thanks again, and we'll see you next time. The June webinar is going to be coming up. I think it's June 10th, and it's going to be focused on how we help women live missional lifestyles. And so that'll be a great webinar as well. All right. Thanks so much, and we will see you next time.
Thank you.